In 433 CE, Bhikkhunī Devasārā Tissarā led a courageous delegation of Sri Lankan nuns across the sea to Nanjing. At the Southern Forest Monastery, they enabled the first dual ordination of more than 300 Chinese women, establishing the world's longest-standing Bhikkhuni lineage. Documented in the Bhikkhunī Zhuan by Baochang in 516 CE, this lineage spread through Korea, Vietnam, Japan, and beyond. Today, through Visita Leelaratna's work in Canada, that 1,600-year bridge between Sri Lanka, China, and Canada continues, a living testament to wisdom in motion.
Moral excellence and deeply imbibed in the Dhamma epitomizes and exemplifies the Sangha. The idea is that rigorous training produces people who genuinely embody the teaching.
Now, let's talk about Canada specifically, because I think this is where the story gets genuinely surprising. What's happening here?
So, Canada has become a surprisingly significant location for this revival. And I say surprisingly because when most people think of ancient Buddhist monasticism, they're not picturing Prince Edward Island.
Right, PEI is not exactly what comes to mind.
But according to the Great Wisdom Buddhist Institute's website, as of December 2024, there are about 600 nuns living in eastern PEI.
To a voyage that changed the course of Buddhism in East Asia. It begins in the 5th century, during the reign of King Mahanama in Sri Lanka, around 410 to 431 CE. Buddhism in Sri Lanka was centuries old, and the Bhikkhuni order flourished at Abhayagiri Monastery in Anuradhapura. Across the sea in China, a small community of Buddhist nuns had formed, but their ordinations had been conducted only by monks. According to the Vinaya, full ordination requires a dual ceremony involving both bhikkhus and a quorum of bhikkhunis. Without that quorum, ordination was incomplete. In 429 CE, 8 Sri Lankan bhikkhunis set sail for China, led by Devasārā Therī, recorded in Chinese sources as Tissarā. They traveled aboard a merchant ship captained by Nandi, following trade routes linking South and East Asia. When they reached Nanjing, they settled at Qingfu Nunnery, but there weren't enough bhikkhunis to form the required quorum. Some stayed to learn the language, others returned to Sri Lanka to recruit more bhikkhunis. 4 years later, in 433 CE, 11 more bhikkhunis arrived. With a full quorum, Devasārā Therī, together with Bhikkhu Sangarman from Sri Lanka, performed the first complete dual ordination of Chinese bhikkhunis at the Southern Forest Monastery in Nanjing. Over 300 women were ordained. That ceremony founded an unbroken lineage of bhikkhunis. Centuries later, when the Bhikkhuni order in Sri Lanka had lapsed, it was this unbroken Dharmaguptaka lineage, preserved in China and Taiwan, that helped revive Sri Lanka's Bhikkhuni Sangha. The lineage had come full circle. That is why the new Bhikkhunī Kuti and training center at Surin Park in Sri Lanka is named Tesarā Vaṃsā. This Buddhist Embassy initiative is more than a tribute. It's an intention to reconnect Sri Lanka, China and Canada through a living lineage. Guided by Sīla, Samādhi, and Paññā, Tesarā Vaṃsā will be a home for bhikkhunis to train, grow, and carry the lineage forward, 16 centuries after it first crossed the sea. A lineage that began with one courageous voyage now continues as a bridge between nations. Tesarā Vaṃsā, carrying the Dhamma across oceans and through time.
Family counseling, counseling for pregnant women, weekly meditation for adults and children, counseling for girls from correction schools, children's Dhamma programs, delivering Dhamma discourses at schools and communities. This is active community engagement.
So the training center isn't just producing monastics, it's producing people who go out and serve.
That's the model. Tesarā in Pali means third, or can refer to a third lineage or stream. So Tesarā Vaṃsā, in this framing, gestures toward the idea of a new chapter of lineage, a third wave, if you will, being written in the new world. It's a way of asking, what does it mean when the Bhikkhuna tradition, which nearly vanished, is now being reestablished not in Asia but in Canada? Is that a new Vaṃsā? Is Canada writing its own chapter of this 2,600-year story?
That framing is genuinely striking, because the Vaṃsā tradition was always about legitimizing Buddhism in a new place. And here you have a community in PEI that is, in a sense, doing exactly that.
And the Canadian Journal of Buddhist Studies, a peer-reviewed, open-access publication, explicitly names lineage formation as one of its core areas of scholarly interest. Their website notes they welcome work on doctrinal questions and lineage formation, and on contemporary Buddhist communities concerning the implications of fluid demographic transformations, cultural hybridity, and challenges associated with communal continuity. That's almost a description of exactly what's happening in PEI.
So the academic world is paying attention to this.
Very much so. And there's also a 2022 article in the Journal of the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada, published on Erudite by Henry Hsu and Jamie Scott, titled Building Buddhism in Canada, From the Ishikawa Hotel to the Four Great Sacred Buddhist Mountains Project. Hsu is the inaugural Shi Wu De Professor in Chinese Buddhist Studies at the University of Toronto. The article examines how Buddhist communities have physically built their presence in Canada, which is another dimension of this Vaṃsā question. The architecture itself becomes part of the lineage narrative.
The new monastery in Brudenell was designed by 9 Yard Studio in Charlottetown and features traditional Asian architecture, according to CBC. So even the building is making a statement.
Exactly. And that's not incidental. In the Vaṃsā tradition, as Berkowitz notes, material objects, relics, images, sacred sites were among the primary concerns of these legitimizing narratives. A monastery with traditional Asian architecture in rural PEI is, in a very real sense, a material claim on the landscape. It says, this lineage is here now.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the gender dimension of all this. Because the Bhikkhunī revival isn't just a story about Buddhism spreading geographically, it's also a story about women reclaiming a role that was taken from them.
That's the heart of it, really. A 2025 paper in the International Journal of Research Publication and Reviews by researchers at Integral University frames it as a transition from enlightened masters to empowered matriarchs. The paper examines how Buddhist narratives and institutions have both safeguarded and checked patriarchal structures. And it looks at contemporary feminist reinterpretations of sacred texts and the reestablishment of female ordination as ongoing efforts to reclaim women's place within Buddhist discourse. Stephen Berkowitz, a professor at Missouri State University, has a chapter on this in the Routledge Handbook of Theravada Buddhism, published in 2022. He argues that Vaṃsā texts, historical narratives, were critical for the development of the very idea of the Theravada tradition.
So these aren't just history books, they're legitimizing documents.
Exactly. Berkowitz writes that Vaṃsā texts relate the story of how textual and ritual traditions associated with the Buddha were transmitted and established outside of India. They were instrumental in developing the idea of a singular monastic lineage stemming from the Buddha's disciples. And crucially, they gave a central role to Buddha relics and images in establishing the Sāsana, the Buddhist dispensation, in new territories.
So every time Buddhism moved into a new place, Sri Lanka, Central Asia, China, there was a Vaṃsā narrative that said, essentially, this is legitimate, this is connected to the original lineage.
That's a really clean way to put it. And Berkowitz is careful to note that Vaṃsā texts imply more coherence and uniformity to the Theravada than what its heterogeneous network of monastic and lay communities actually represented over time. In other words, the narrative of lineage is partly a construction, but it's a construction that does real work in the world. The order was introduced to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BCE by Theri Sangamitta, who was the daughter of Emperor Asoka of India. She arrived just 6 months after the Bhikkhu Sangha was established there.
So women's monasticism arrived almost simultaneously with men's monasticism in Sri Lanka.
Almost simultaneously. And what's fascinating is that according to the Dipavamsa, one of the oldest Sri Lankan chronicles, the very first people in Sri Lanka to attain Sotapatti, the first stage of the Buddhist path, were actually women. Princess Anula and her 500 attendants. Women were first.
That detail is going to surprise a lot of people.
And then there's the Therigata, a collection of poems by elder nuns about enlightenment, preserved in the Pali Canon. It's one of the oldest surviving bodies of women's literature in the world. These are first-person accounts of liberation, written by women from over 2,000 years ago.
And most people have never heard of it.
Most people have never heard of it. And that's part of what makes the current revival so meaningful. It's not just about creating something new, it's about recovering something that was always there.
Before we get to the present day, I want to ask about something you mentioned earlier, the asymmetry between monks and nuns, the extra rules. There's a set of rules called the 8 Garudharmas. right? What's the deal with those?
Yeah, so the 8 Garudhamas are a set of rules that mandated the Bhikkhuni order to be subordinate to and reliant upon the Bhikkhu order. And for a long time, they were attributed to the Buddha. But according to Wikipedia's entry on Bhikkhuni, the historical authorship of those rules cannot actually be traced to the Buddha. They were written by others at a later date.
So the rules that placed nuns below monks weren't even from the Buddha himself.
That's what the scholarship indicates. And that's a significant finding, because those rules have been used for centuries to justify limiting women's roles in Buddhist institutions. When you trace them back and find they don't originate with the Buddha, it reframes the whole conversation.
Okay, so now let's fast forward to the present, because this is where it gets really interesting to me, the revival happening in the West.
In Prince Edward Island, by 600 women with an average age of 29 who are studying the 5 great treatises in the only institution outside Asia offering that curriculum to all females.
And doing it in a place where they had to fight for 4 years just to get a building permit.
Which is its own kind of Vaṃsā story, isn't it? The narrative of a community proving its right to exist in a new landscape. That's exactly what those ancient chronicles were documenting. The difference is that this one is happening in real time, and the community is predominantly women, and the lineage they're restoring is one that was nearly erased.
And the Canadian Journal of Buddhist Studies is there to document it. Peer-reviewed, open access, explicitly focused on lineage formation and cultural hybridity in the Canadian context.
The scholarly infrastructure is catching up to the lived reality, which is how it should work. And I think the broader implication for anyone listening is this. When we talk about religious traditions, we tend to think of them as ancient and fixed. But what's happening in PEI is a reminder that traditions are living things. They disappear, they get rebuilt, they find new homes in places nobody expected. A bhikkhuni, the Pali term, is a fully ordained Buddhist nun. And the key word there is fully ordained. It's not someone who's taken a few vows or is living in a monastery informally. According to Wikipedia's entry on bhikkhuni, these are women who live by the Vinaya, which is a comprehensive set of monastic rules and ethical precepts.
And how many rules are we talking?
It depends on the school. In the Theravada tradition, it's 311 codes of conduct. In the Dharmaguptaka school, it's 348. And in the Mulasarvastivada school, it goes up to 364. Compare that to monks, bhikkhus, who follow 253 precepts. So nuns actually have more rules to observe than monks do.
Wait, nuns have more rules than monks? That's already counterintuitive.
Right, and that asymmetry is actually part of a much bigger and more complicated story. But let's start at the beginning, because the origin of the Bhikkhuni order is genuinely remarkable. According to the Buddhist canon, the order was first created by the Buddha himself, at the specific request of his aunt and foster mother, Mahaprajapati Gotami, who became the very first ordained bhikkhuni.
So this goes all the way back to the Buddha's own lifetime?
All the way back. And the canon is explicit that women are as capable of reaching enlightenment as men. There's even a famous quote from Guru Padmasambhava in the Vajrayana tradition that says, and I'm quoting here, "The basis for realizing enlightenment is a human body. Male or female, there is no great difference."
Now, let's talk about Canada specifically, because I think this is where the story gets genuinely surprising. What's happening here?
So Canada has become a surprisingly significant location for this revival. And I say surprisingly because when most people think of ancient Buddhist monasticism, they're not picturing Prince Edward Island.
Right, PEI is not exactly what comes to mind.
But according to the Great Wisdom Buddhist Institute's website, as of December 2024, there are about 600 nuns living in eastern PEI and an average age of 29. And GWBI describes itself as the only monastery outside Asia offering the 5 great treatises curriculum to all females.
600 nuns in Prince Edward Island. I genuinely did not expect that number.
And they expect to reach 1,400 living at their North Lotus campus in 20 years or more. Most of the nuns are from Asia, mainly Taiwan, but they also have nuns from the US, Singapore, New Zealand, China, and other parts of Canada.
So it's genuinely international.
Very much so. And the reason PEI was chosen is interesting. According to GWBI's website, teacher Jen Ru, who leads the community, spent years traveling to various countries looking for the ideal place to study and practice Buddhism. When she came to PEI, she was struck by its serenity. She's quoted as saying, "I think when people all over the world come to this charming countryside, all their troubles disappear. By looking at the trees, looking out at nature, looking at the skies, it's as if their hearts have taken flight.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And there's also something happening in Alberta, right?
Yes, in Canmore, Alberta. According to the Northwest Dharma Association, a new monastic community focused on nuns and depth of practice launched there. The Canmore Theravada Buddhist community and monastery had actually been a meditation center for 28 years before it became a monastery, with the arrival of Buddhist nun Ayya Ahimsa in December.
28 years as a meditation center, then it becomes a monastery. That's quite a transition.
And the founders had all lived in larger monasteries that took a lot of work to maintain and hosted many visitors. They wanted something smaller, with more quiet time for meditation.
So they were deliberately choosing depth over breadth.
Exactly. The monastery aspires to be a residence for 2 bhikkhunis, or 1 bhikkhuni and 1 in training, plus 1 or 2 stewards. And they offer teachings to the community 3 times weekly. It's a very intentional model, lots of quiet time for practice, and then structured engagement with the wider community. And that diversity is actually healthy. Different practitioners need different environments. Some people thrive in a structured curriculum setting. Others need the solitude of a forest tradition. The fact that multiple models are developing means the tradition is adapting rather than just transplanting one fixed form.
I want to push back a little here, though, because there's a counter-argument that says, look, these are ancient traditions with very specific rules and lineages, and when you transplant them to Canada or the American West, something inevitably gets lost or diluted. How do you think about that tension?
It's a real tension, and I don't think it should be dismissed. The Vinaya, the monastic code, is very specific. The precepts are very specific, and there are genuine debates within these communities about how to maintain authenticity while also being accessible in a Western context. But I'd also point out that the tradition has always traveled and adapted. The Bhikkhuni mission from Sri Lanka to China in the 5th century CE, nuns headed by Theri Devasārā, who went to China during the reign of King Mahanama and established the order of nuns there, that was also a transplantation across cultures.
Mm-hmm. So adaptation isn't new, it's actually part of how the tradition has survived.
It's baked into the history. That Sri Lankan mission to China sojourned there for 8 years until a sufficient number of nuns was present to conduct ordination rites. They were building something from scratch in a foreign culture. That's exactly what's happening in Canada right now.
That's a really useful historical parallel. And it also reframes what Tesarā Vaṃsā and the Bhikkhunī Kuti are doing. They're not anomalies, they're part of a very long pattern.
Exactly. The name Tesarā Vaṃsā itself, Vaṃsā in Pali, means lineage or chronicle. So the name is already invoking that sense of continuity with something ancient. A kuti is a small dwelling or hermitage for a monastic. So a Bhikkhunī Kuti is literally a dwelling place for bhikkhunis, a place where this lineage can be lived and transmitted.
And the training center component is what makes it more than just a residence.
Right. A training center implies a curriculum, a pedagogy, a structured path. And if you look at what the most established Bhikkhuni training centers do, these lineages didn't disappear because the teachings were wrong or because women weren't capable. The Buddhist canon is explicit that women are as capable of reaching enlightenment as men. They disappeared because of structural barriers, some of which weren't even traceable to the Buddha himself. And now, very deliberately, communities are rebuilding what was lost.
And the scale of what's being rebuilt is significant. 600 nuns in PEI alone, with projections of reaching 1,400. A monastery in the Canadian Rockies.
And what's striking is that the average age at GWBI is 29. These are young women making serious, long-term commitments to monastic life. That's not a tradition in decline, that's a tradition with momentum.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that surprised me most going into this. I think a lot of people assume that monasticism is a shrinking world, that fewer people are choosing that path. But the numbers tell a different story, at least in these communities.
And the model is evolving too. It's not just about retreat and contemplation.
Which brings us back to the question of what a training center like Tesarā Vaṃsā's Bhikkhunī Kuti is really for. It's not just producing monastics, it's producing a certain kind of presence in the world.
That's exactly it. And the vision articulated by communities complete in Dhamma and Vinaya, in virtue, meditation, and wisdom, that's an ambitious aspiration. It's not just about keeping a tradition alive, it's about making it fully functional and fully alive, taking these ancient precepts seriously, building the infrastructure to support each other, and then going out and serving their communities. The Therigatha, those poems written by enlightened nuns over 2,000 years ago, they're not just historical documents. They're a lineage that people are actively continuing.
And for anyone who's curious about this world, whether you're drawn to Buddhist practice yourself or you're just fascinated by how ancient institutions adapt and survive, the story of the Bhikkhunī revival is one of the more quietly remarkable things happening right now. The lineage that nearly went extinct is being rebuilt, one kuti at a time.
One kuti at a time, and with a lot of intention behind it. Bhikkhunis are meditating in the mountains and teaching the community 3 times a week. The tradition didn't disappear. It went quiet for a while, and now it's speaking again.